It seems we know everything about ancient Greece. We were told about it in school, after all. The Parthenon, the 300 Spartans, blind Homer with the Iliad and the Odyssey. But there were far more Spartans. The Parthenon served as a central bank. What's more, such a country, ancient Greece with its capital in Athens, never existed. And the Trojan War and Alexander the Great are separated by almost as much time as separates us from Prince Vladimir. Let's try to figure out what's what in ancient Greece, a little faster than in a couple of thousand years. 3,716 years ago, the pyramids already stand in Egypt. Babylon is the world's first metropolis, where there is everything, even a prototype of the Tower of Babel. And on the island of Crete, a mysterious civilization is flourishing. They already have multi-story buildings, three-story palaces with sewage, plumbing, and even swimming pools. And there are no fortified walls at all. It seems the Cretans live relatively peacefully. They look at flowers, blue monkeys, and beautiful women. The women walk around with their breasts exposed, and the men wear loincloths or skirts. They also have a fleet and a writing system. We could learn a lot from these inscriptions, but no one can decipher them yet. Meanwhile, on the island of Thera, this is modern-day Santorini, now a wedding paradise, the most powerful eruption in European history. Part of Thera goes underwater. Apparently, this is how the myth of Atlantis was born. 100-meter tsunamis, clouds of ash for 1,000 kilometers around. Crete will not recover from the eruption. Soon invaders come here. On the once peaceful island, bronze weapons and tablets in another language appear. They were deciphered quite recently. It turned out to be the earliest version of Greek. It was spoken by warlike tribes who at the beginning of the second millennium settled neighboring Greece and built Thebes, Athens, Mycenae, and Pylos there. Only these cities are already hiding behind 6-meter walls. Life here is not peaceful at all. After a few centuries, the Greeks themselves will not believe that their grandfathers built this, and they will tell stories that the walls were built by Cyclops, and that on Crete there was no other civilization before them at all. They'll say the 3-story palace is Greek, the fleet is Greek, and even the Minotaur is half bull and half Greek. And no one is bothered that games with bulls are a purely Cretan pastime. The Greeks masterfully appropriate everything they encounter on their path and will continue to do so for another 1,000 years. Having conquered Crete, they also master the seas. They sail and get rich. In the luxurious tombs at Mycenae, lots of gold. Almost all the tablets with writing are accounting reports. Mycenae is the very city that fought Troy in Homer's Iliad. Just a century and a half ago, this was considered a fairy tale, until Heinrich Schliemann, a Russian subject, millionaire, and amateur archaeologist, excavated both Mycenae and Troy. Now the legendary Trojan horse stands here, which landed the Mycenaean troops in the enemy's rear. Archaeologists did indeed find traces of fires and destruction in Troy that occurred around 1200 BC, but at about the same time, all settlements in general are falling into decline, from Thebes to Knossos, and from Troy to Ashkelon. Barbaric tribes are advancing on the Mediterranean in a solid front. The next 300 years are called the Dark Ages. Writing disappears. We have nothing to read about what was happening then. Fortunately, we have Homer. Everyone has heard of the blind poet, the author of the Iliad and the Odyssey, the very first works of European literature. In reality, we don't know what he looked like, when he lived, or even if he was one person. Something else is important to us. The Iliad and Odyssey were written down after the Dark Ages, but the hero's way of life is from that exact time. For example, Odysseus is a king only because he has more goats and pigs. His palace is a wooden shed behind a stockade with a pile of manure at the entrance. His father sleeps on the ground in a pile of ashes with the slaves. All the heroes are illiterate. Instead of money, oxen. Not much like Crete and Mycenae with their 3-story palaces, right? So what happened? The Mycenaean civilization is destroyed by the Dorians, also Greeks, but completely savage. Descending from the mountains in the northern Balkans, they settle the Peloponnese, Crete, and sail to Rhodes. The previous population either hides in the mountains or flees to the east. Of all the achievements of the previous civilization, the Dorians will keep only the most necessary, the sailed ship and the potter's wheel. Only 100 years later, their pottery begins to be covered with the simplest patterns. And only after 4 centuries will the most primitive images of people and animals appear. Around the same time, at the turn of the 9th and 8th centuries BC, the Greeks adopted a completely new alphabet from their neighbors, the Phoenicians, unlike the linear script of Crete and Mycenae. Do you recognize the modern Greek letters? The fog of the Dark Ages is finally lifting. Only here will the ancient Greece familiar to us begin, a country that, in reality, never was. It is not a state with single borders and a capital, but many very different and completely independent cities, polis. How did this happen? In Chekhov's words, Greece has everything. In reality, it has nothing. Greece is sea and mountains, dividing it into separate scraps. Only a few of them are suitable for agriculture. Grain has to be imported immediately. But why not grow it themselves? Over there, across the sea, thus begins the great colonization. Stern music. If you believe the first historians, Miletus alone founded 90 colonies, among them even modern-day Theodosia and Kerch. The heel of the Italian boot is also settled. This is how the alphabet gets there, which will later become Latin and conquer the world. Greek civilization spreads from present-day Rostov-on-Don to present-day Marseille. They bring grapevines there, from which French winemaking will later grow. Amphorae, fragments of which are now scattered from Gibraltar to Georgia, are not decorative items, but containers for grain and vessels for wine. Wine, by the way, was diluted with water, 1 to 3, and only barbarians drank it straight. To make trade convenient, coins appear. Like the alphabet, they were borrowed from neighbors. According to Plato, in a couple of 100 years, the Greeks had settled around the Mediterranean Sea like frogs around a pond. Almost the only two polis not participating in colonization are Athens and Sparta. The Spartans are descendants of those same warlike Dorians who destroyed the Mycenaean civilization. They solved their land hunger differently. They conquered their neighbors, the huge fertile region of Messenia. All its inhabitants were declared helots, something between slaves and serfs. There were many more of them than the Spartans themselves. Thus, Sparta changes from an ordinary polis into a military camp, whose main task is to prevent an uprising. In Athens, things are also different. The struggle for land led to the aristocracy and the people having to negotiate. Democracy would later arise from this. But first, tyrants will come to power. A Greek tyrant doesn't necessarily terrorize the people, the demos. Quite the opposite. Often he is an aristocrat who is feuding with other aristocrats. Therefore, he promises the common people a good life and, using their support, seizes power by force. Now all the tyrant's energy goes into maintaining power. Therefore, he doesn't reform anything, but simply drives his aristocrat competitors out of the polis. To distract the people's attention, tyrants invent new holidays and cults, and the dissatisfied can be boiled in a bronze bull. But you can't boil everyone. The tyrants are overthrown, and the weakened aristocracy tries to come to an agreement with the people. This is how Greek democracy is born. If an ancient Greek looked at modern democracy, he would say only one word: oligarchy. Their democracy was direct, that is, no deputies. If there are 6,000 citizens in a polis, all of them have the right to participate in the popular assembly. True, citizens are less than a quarter of all inhabitants, minus slaves, minus women, minus medics, the immigrant workers. By the middle of the 6th century, the most developed polis are not Athens and Sparta, but the polis of Ionia. They are the first to adopt the innovations of their eastern neighbors: the alphabet, money, mathematics, a fleet, and complex trade logistics. Meanwhile, a threat unexpectedly arises next to them: the huge Persian Empire. In 499, Miletus still has hope of maintaining independence, and it resists. Athens comes to help, but nothing works out. The Persians burn Miletus and decide to move on. The attempts to conquer Greece stretched on for 20 years. We know how it happened thanks to the first historian, Herodotus. He reports that no fewer Greek polis fought for the Persians than on the side of Athens and Sparta. How did they manage to win? The first reason is military innovation. At the Battle of Marathon, the Greeks used the phalanx, a regular infantry formation in several ranks. Herodotus says that the Persians lost 6,400 men, while the Athenians lost only 192, plus one messenger who ran 42 kilometers to Athens to report the victory, after which he immediately died. The second reason has already become a meme. In the pass of Thermopylae, 300 Spartans led by King Leonidas stopped hundreds of thousands of Persians for 3 days. True, along with them, several thousand more Greeks from other polis are holding back the onslaught, and those same half-serf helots. But all the same, it's about the Spartan spirit. It's not for nothing that for a couple of centuries they have been living in barracks even in peacetime. And the third reason is the fleet. Silver deposits were found not far from Athens. They could have been spent in any way, but by a democratic vote it was decided to use them to build 200 triremes, very fast and maneuverable warships with 3 rows of oars. Thanks to the newest fleet, the Greeks defeat the Persians in a decisive naval battle, and this is followed by a victory on land. The Greeks go on the counter-offensive. Simultaneously, the Sicilian Greeks defeat their longtime rivals, Carthage. Thus, the scattered Poleis defended the territory on which classical Greek culture was born. To finally defeat Persia and liberate the Poleis in Asia, Athens creates a maritime league. Now they finally become the center of the Greek world. 150 cities, here are just some of them, agreed to pay an annual contribution for the maintenance of the common army and fleet. The treasury is kept on Delos, the sacred island of Apollo. But soon enough, of course, for greater financial security, they propose changing the patron to Athena. Guess in which polis her representative office opens. The most elite real estate of the 5th century BC with the best view in all of Greece, the Parthenon, is built not so much as a temple, but as a central bank where the entire allied treasury soon ends up. Without this money, there would be no Greek classics, sculpture, drama, architecture, philosophy. At the head of the new financial center is the strategist and orator Pericles. Quiet melody in the background. He concludes a 30-year peace with Sparta, restores the Acropolis destroyed by the Persians, and extends the fortress walls to the port. It is rebuilt for the first time according to a regular plan, without which there would be no St. Petersburg or New York. Where there is money, there are the best minds. The sculptor Phidias immortalizes Greece in stone. The philosopher Anaxagoras expresses the outrageous idea. The sun is not the god Helios on a chariot, but a hot body the size of the Peloponnesian Peninsula. All of this great culture is created in just half a century. Other polis are terribly envious of Athens' happiness, especially Sparta and its allies. The Cold War between them had been smoldering ever since the victory over the Persians, and in 431 it turned into a hot one. The Spartans and their allies besiege the impregnable Athens. The inhabitants hide behind the walls. There are no interruptions in the food supply. Grain is imported by sea from Africa, but along with it, either typhus or plague. And a pestilence begins in the city. Even Pericles himself dies. Demagogues come to replace him. Whoever promises more is elected strategist. Thus Alcibiades, Pericles' unprincipled nephew, becomes the head of the Athenian army and navy. His idea is a small, victorious war. Let's drop everything and sail to Sicily, as if we don't have enough trouble with Sparta. The fleet is ready, but on the night before the expedition, the inexplicable happens. All over the city, someone breaks off all the most prominent parts of the statues of Hermes. The polis is indignant. Alcibiades is accused of the provocation, summoned to court, but he flees to Sparta and asks for political asylum there. The chief strategist is now advising the enemy. The allies leave the game one by one. The famous fleet is defeated. Athens agrees to a humiliating peace on the condition that it tears down its fortress walls. They aimed at Hermes, but shattered all the might of Athens. But against this gloomy backdrop, classical tragedy and comedy flourish. The 3 great tragedians, Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides, and the comedian Aristophanes create plays that are still staged today. Although they wrote them fully confident that the first production would be the only one. That's how theater was organized then. But thousands of people would see it. Not like now. Ancient drama was always about current events, and so it turned out that the worse things were in the city, the better it was for culture. There is no winner in the Peloponnesian War. All the polis of Greece fall into decline. But unexpectedly, things are going well for the Macedonians, distant relatives of the Greeks, whom the Greeks had always considered almost barbarians. And now even the great philosopher Aristotle goes to Macedon to earn money. There he works as a tutor for one very talented boy. The boy's dad is named Philip. He is the one who strengthens the Macedonian kingdom and in 338 defeats the coalition of Greeks and unites almost all of Greece into a single union to finally deal with the Persians. But Philip is killed, and his son, Alexander the Great, continues his father's work. He lightning fast invades Asia, defeats the army of the Persian king Darius, but does not return home and goes as far as India. Thus a new world is born, the Hellenistic world. Greek and Eastern cultures mix into a single whole. The polis model strides across the world. Cities named Alexandria appear everywhere, but now without any democracy. All officials in Asia speak Greek, but in Europe, new gods with distinct Eastern features move in with the old gods on Olympus. Alexander himself is declared a god in Egypt. He is delighted, and now he only receives ambassadors who travel not to earthly kings, but to the gods at Delphi. Protocol requires everyone to fall at his feet according to Eastern custom. One can only guess how this would have ended. Greek decrees have been found calling for the spread of Buddhism, but Alexander dies young, and the place of his death, Babylon, becomes the capital of an empire that immediately begins to crack at the seams. While Alexander's successors, they are called the Epigoni, fight among themselves, a new ambitious power is growing in the West. In 146 BC, Rome conquers Greece, and in 30 BC, the last strongholds of Hellenism in Egypt. But Greek culture wins even here, and with Roman expansion, it finally spreads throughout the world. Now the Romans read the Iliad and the Odyssey in Greek, and later they will also read the New Testament in Greek. In 330 AD, on the site of the old Greek colony of Byzantium, Emperor Constantine will build a new city, Constantinople. Thus will begin the history of the Byzantine Empire, which will extend the life of Greek culture for the next 1,000 years and leave us several more gifts as a legacy. For example, another alphabet, ours.